Have you ever felt weighed down by the hurts of your past, burdened by anger, resentment, guilt, or sadness that just won't go away? I know I have. For years, I carried around emotional baggage that was holding me back from living my best life. The pain of betrayals, the shame of mistakes, the devastation of loss, it all piled up until I could barely breathe under the weight of it all. Can anyone relate to feeling stuck in an endless cycle of reliving your hurts and grievances, replaying those painful memories over and over, allowing them to define you and dictate your reality? I was a master at it. Nursing grudges gave me a strange sense of power and righteousness. If I forgave and moved on, it felt like I was letting the people who hurt me off the hook, like I was minimizing or excusing their actions. So instead, I clung to my anger and resentment like a security blanket. But carrying that negativity took a massive toll. I was perpetually stressed, anxious, and on edge. My relationships suffered as I pushed away loved ones. My self-confidence plummeted as I beat myself up constantly for my failures and shortcomings. Physically, I was a mess. My immune system weakened. I battled insomnia. Headaches and stomach aches were constant companions. Has anyone here experienced similar physical manifestations of emotional turmoil? It wasn't until I hit rock bottom, in the grips of a depression so dark that I couldn't see a way out, that I realized something had to change. I was the one allowing the negativity to consume me. The hurt I experienced was in the past, but I was choosing to relive it every single day by refusing to forgive. What moments or realizations have caused you to reevaluate your approach to forgiveness? In that low moment, I decided I was finally ready to let go of the baggage weighing me down, to forgive myself and others for our very human imperfections and frailties. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but also the most profoundly healing. By choosing forgiveness, I was finally able to release the traumas of my past and reclaim my power in the present. If you're feeling burdened, trapped by anger, guilt, or sadness today, I want you to know that you have the power to set yourself free. It starts by making the choice to forgive yourself, those who have hurt you, and the universe for the injustices you've endured. Forgiveness is the greatest gift we can give ourselves, and it's a choice we have to make over and over again. But the freedom, peace, and self-love that awaits on the other side is absolutely worth it. We all carry emotional burdens, the hurts, betrayals, and pains we've experienced in life. These burdens accumulate over time, becoming heavier and more destructive the longer we refuse to confront and release them. Like a massive backpack filled with rocks, they weigh us down mentally, emotionally, and even physically. Think about it when you're angry or resentful towards someone who wronged you. How does that feel in your body? For me, it was like carrying around a giant ball of tension in my chest and gut. My muscles were constantly clenched, my jaw locked in a grimace. I was perpetually on edge, easily irritated, and quick to lash out, even at loved ones over minor things. That constant muscle tension and flood of stress hormones takes an immense physical toll over time. Has anyone here struggled with physical manifestations of pent-up anger, resentment, or other negative emotions? Beyond just the physiological impacts, withholding forgiveness also wreaks havoc on our mental and emotional well-being. When we replay painful memories and hurts over and over, we get stuck in cycles of rumination that keep us trapped in the past. The anger, sadness, and bitterness we harbor towards others or ourselves becomes all-consuming, casting a dark shadow over everything. Depression, anxiety, low self-esteem. These are just some of the mental health challenges that unforgiveness can breed and exacerbate. I know this from personal experience. For years after a very painful betrayal, I allowed that experience to define my entire reality. My ex's actions became the lens through which I viewed the world and every personal interaction and relationship. I was hypervigilant and distrustful of everyone around me, certain that I would inevitably be hurt and disappointed again. In doing so, I sabotaged my ability to cultivate meaningful connections and experience intimacy. My anger was a suit of armor that protected me from being vulnerable, but it also prevented me from truly living and embracing joy. Can anyone relate to that sense of being a prisoner to your past hurts and grievances? To having your worldview so colored by anger, sadness, or resentment that it clouds your perceptions and decision making? It's an incredibly restrictive and isolating way to move through life. Withholding forgiveness also traps us in a victim mindset, robbing us of our personal power. As long as we stubbornly cling to our stance as the aggrieved party, we place the control over our happiness and healing in the hands of those who have wronged us. We remain eternally bound to them and the pain they caused, unable to move forward. Conversely, the act of forgiveness is a radical reclaiming of our agency. It's an acknowledgement that we alone have the power to define our reality and authoring our own life story. The choice to forgive doesn't minimize or excuse the hurt done to us, but it does ensure that we are no longer held hostage by it. So I invite you today to look at the emotional burdens you've been carrying. The grudges, resentments, anger, sadness, shame, or guilt that continually weigh you down. Reflect on how harboring those feelings shows up in your body and psyche. For me, it manifested as chronic muscle tension, panic attacks, insomnia, headaches, and brain fog. But you may experience different physical and mental impacts. The important thing is to bring awareness to how withholding forgiveness affects your quality of life across all domains. Because at the end of the day, the only person truly being burdened and constrained by unforgiveness is you. Those who have perpetrated hurts against you aren't being impacted. They've likely moved on while you remain stuck in the trauma. Or if they haven't moved on, their inability to take accountability and make amends is their own cross to bear. Staying tethered to them through blame, hatred, and resentment just holds you back from healing and living freely. The path out of this cyclical suffering begins with a powerful decision to forgive, to let go of the narratives and emotional baggage that have been consuming you, to relinquish the identities of victim and holder of grudges that have defined you for so long. It's rarely an easy choice, but forgiveness is ultimately an act of radical self-love and self-preservation, one that has the power to lighten your load and liberate you from past pains. So I ask you, are you ready to set down the burdens you've been carrying, to forgive yourself and others so you can finally heal, grow, and embrace all the beauty and joy this life has to offer? The path forward won't be easy, but I promise the freedom awaiting you on the other side is absolutely worth it. For many of us, the hardest person to forgive is ourselves. We berate ourselves relentlessly for poor choices, perceived failures, and missed opportunities, replaying regrets and shoulda, coulda, wouldas on an endless loop in our minds, punishing ourselves mentally and emotionally for not being perfect. Can anyone here relate to being their own harshest critic and judge? I certainly can. For years after making some big life mistakes that derailed my career and relationships, I engaged in constant self-flagellation, calling myself an idiot, a loser, berating my lack of discipline and follow-through. I constructed my entire self-worth around those failures and shortcomings. No matter what successes or wins I achieved, I'd immediately dismiss them because in my mind I was still just a disappointment and let down at my core. That negative inner voice was so loud and persistent, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. I stopped taking risks or putting myself out there for fear of further failure. I self-sabotaged in ways that upheld the flawed narrative I had written about my own inadequacy. My self-confidence plummeted as I descended into people-pleasing, approval-seeking behavior, desperate to finally feel worthy and enough. Has anyone else struggled with harsh self-judgment, fueling a cycle of self-sabotage, low self-esteem, and playing small? If so, you know how suffocating and restrictive that negative self-talk can become. It robs you of your personal power, preventing you from showing up fully in the world and embracing your potential. Intellectually, we all know that we're imperfect human beings doing the best we can. That failures, mistakes, and poor decisions are inevitable parts of life that facilitate growth and resilience. We'd never speak to our loved ones with the same cruel, demeaning language we use towards ourselves. And yet we continue to bully our own psyches mercilessly. So how do we break free from this toxic pattern of harsh self-judgment and inability to forgive ourselves? It starts with cultivating radical self-compassion, treating ourselves with the same kindness, empathy, and understanding we readily extend to others. This was a major mindset shift for me. Instead of beating myself up over mistakes, I started asking, how can I learn from this experience, and how would I guide a loved one through this situation? I challenged my negative self-talk by responding with more supportive inner dialogue like, you're human, it's okay to mess up sometimes, and every struggle is an opportunity to practice resilience. Over time, this softened my inner critic's loud, punishing voice. I was able to look at my failures and shortcomings with more objectivity, perspective, and self-acceptance. Rather than defining my entire self-worth around them, I could separate my intrinsic value as a human being from my missteps. Has anyone found practices like positive self-talk, mantras, or affirmations helpful for quieting self-judgment? In addition to self-compassion, I also found that making amends either materially or energetically helped me forgive myself. For the big things I regretted, I'd take concrete actions to try to make it right where possible. Apologizing, repairing relationships, changing behaviors. This wasn't about earning forgiveness so much as demonstrating my sincere remorse and commitment to doing better. For smaller self-criticisms around not meeting my own expectations, I'd perform symbolic acts of self-forgiveness. Things like writing myself a letter, expressing understanding and letting it go. Or doing a meditation focused on sending myself compassion and unconditional self-love. These practices helped me fully process, release, and integrate my mistakes rather than repressing them. Because the reality is we can't actually change the past or undo our mistakes and failures much as we might obsess over trying. What we can change is how we relate to them and the meaning we assign them. Do we let our past define us and keep us feeling stuck and inadequate? Or do we embrace our humanness, learn from our missteps, and use them as fuel for growth? Forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness, is a brave act of looking ourselves squarely in the eye, flaws, frailties, failures, and all might have, and yet still choosing to love, accept, and embrace all of ourselves unconditionally. It's an acknowledgement that we are perfectly imperfect beings worthy of our own compassion. So I invite you to make a conscious decision today to stop beating yourself up and withholding forgiveness from yourself. To treat yourself with the same kindness, empathy, and unconditional love you'd offer a dear friend or loved one. The path of radical self-acceptance and letting go of harsh self-judgment isn't always easy, but it's immensely liberating. Because at the end of the day, you're the only one who has to live 24/7 with your own inner voice. Why not make that voice a supportive, loving, compassionate friend that has your back, no matter what? You deserve to forgive yourself for not being perfect. You deserve to feel free, light, and at peace. Self-forgiveness is the ultimate act of self-love, one that allows you to fully show up for your life without restrictions. While forgiving ourselves can be incredibly difficult, many would argue that forgiving those who have hurt us deeply is even more challenging. Anger, betrayal, injustice, these wounds can feel unforgivable. The notion of letting go and showing compassion to the people who have caused us immense pain seems incomprehensible. Yet withholding forgiveness only poisons us further and prevents true healing. Who here has struggled with feeling stuck in unforgiveness towards someone who wronged them? I know I have. Years ago, I was blindsided by a profound betrayal from someone I trusted implicitly, a violation of the core tenets of our relationship that shattered me. In the aftermath, I was consumed by rage, sadness, and a burning desire for vengeance. I fantasized about making this person suffer the way I had, about unleashing my fury and anger upon them until they felt as wrecked as I did in that moment. Can anyone relate to that visceral desire to lash out when we've been deeply hurt, to want to punish the perpetrator and make them feel our pain tenfold? It's such a primal, animalistic instinct. And often, we give in to it by harboring resentments, cutting people out of our lives completely, or even retaliating in destructive ways. For a long time, that's exactly what I did. I walled off my heart, determined to never let myself be vulnerable or trust anyone again. I cut that person out of my life entirely, refusing to engage or even hear their side. My anger, hatred, and resentment became all-consuming. Everything I did and every decision I made was filtered through the lens of that hurt. It was like being possessed by a demon I just couldn't shake. Looking back, I can see how hanging on to that anger, blame, and desire for vengeance was actually punishing me more than the person who had wronged me. They likely hadn't given me a second thought while I was emotionally self-immolating. All the negativity was only poisoning me from the inside out. Has anyone here experienced that feeling of being trapped in a cycle of resentment and unforgiveness that ends up causing you more suffering? Where you're so focused on making the other person hurt that you don't see how you're only compounding your own pain. It's a soul-sucking, draining way to live. The shift happened for me when I started working with a counselor who introduced me to practices like empathy, perspective taking, and looking for the humanity in others. Instead of demonizing the person who betrayed me, I had to find a way to see them as a flawed, struggling human being, doing their best from their own level of consciousness, not excusing their actions, but understanding them. This was not easy work. It involved excavating and confronting the root hurts, fears, and insecurities that were driving my ex-friend's behavior. The feelings of inadequacy, the trauma from their own past, the mental health struggles, none of which justified the betrayal but gave me a window into why they may have acted out in such a self-destructive way. As I peeled back the layers through this lens of empathy and perspective taking, I was able to look at the situation with more nuance and humanity. The black and white, vehement hatred began to give way to shades of gray and a more balanced understanding. The person's actions were unacceptable, but they were still a human being worthy of compassion on a core level. From that place of empathy and understanding, I was finally able to start loosening my white-knuckled grip on unforgiveness, to let go of my tight, rigid stance as the righteous victim and allow space for more nuanced truth to enter. Has anyone found that seeking to understand the other person's perspective, even just a little bit, has helped open your heart to forgiveness? Because here's what I've come to believe: holding on to hatred, anger, and resentment towards those who have hurt us is fundamentally an act of self-punishment. We think we're hurting or punishing them by freezing them out or holding a grudge. But in reality, they've likely moved on while we're the ones stewing in negativity and poisoning ourselves. Unforgiveness is like drinking a chalice of poison and expecting it to hurt the other person. It's letting someone else's transgressions against us constantly rent space in our minds and hearts, preventing us from being fully present and living with freedom. The person who wronged us already took something from us once. Why let them continue robbing us of our peace and joy? I'm not saying forgiveness is easy. In many cases, it's one of the hardest things we'll ever do. Nor am I suggesting we excuse or minimize people's hurtful actions towards us. Some transgressions are truly unforgivable on a human level, and in those cases, forgiveness may simply mean releasing our suffering and making peace with what happened. But for most hurts and interpersonal offenses, I've found that actively cultivating empathy, perspective taking, and looking for our shared humanity is key to letting go and forgiving, to freeing ourselves from the prisons of hatred, anger, and resentment that only breed more suffering. Because at the end of the day, withholding forgiveness is a form of self-harm. It's an insidious negativity that slowly eats away at our light, joy, and ability to embrace life fully. The person who hurt you already took something from you once through their actions. Don't let them continue robbing you of your peace, freedom, and power by holding on to unforgiveness. The pathway to true healing is in releasing the burdens of hatred, resentment, anger, and blame. Not minimizing or excusing what happened, but letting go of the negativity surrounding it so you can be free. You owe it to yourself to break the cycle and choose forgiveness, because the freedom and lightness that awaits on the other side is absolutely worth it. By now, I hope I've convinced you of the profound healing power that forgiveness can unlock in our lives, of how letting go of grudges, resentments, guilt, and self-hatred can lighten our spiritual and emotional loads, freeing us to move through the world with more peace, presence, and joy. But forgiveness is not a destination to be reached, then checked off the list. It's an ongoing practice and commitment we must make to ourselves daily. A radical act of courage, self-love, and growth that requires consistent nurturing. Because the truth is, even after we've done the hard work of forgiving ourselves and others for past hurts, new grievances and tests will inevitably arise. We're human, and injuring each other is part of the imperfect human condition that we'll always have to navigate. The real question is, how can we build up the spiritual muscle memory to approach future conflicts from a more conscious, empowered place? For me, it starts with bringing more awareness and mindfulness to my default coping mechanisms when I feel wounded or slighted, becoming an observer of the harsh, punishing self-talk and blame narratives that arise, catching myself before I launch into rumination spirals that breed anger, resentment, and shut me down from vulnerability. Whenever I notice those old habits trying to take hold, I have to consciously pivot and choose different responses rooted in self-compassion, empathy, and perspective taking. Something as simple as pausing to take a few deep breaths and ask myself, is this narrative serving me? Is there another way I can make sense of this situation that aligns with my values around forgiveness? Has anyone found mindfulness techniques helpful for catching their knee-jerk reactions to conflict or hurt? For disrupting those conditioned habits of judgment, anger, and blame that so often lead us down the path of unforgiveness? In addition to present moment awareness, I've found that cultivating certain mindsets and habits in my day-to-day life helps reinforce forgiveness as a core value and way of being. Things like practicing radical self-acceptance and body neutrality, embracing my flaws and imperfections so I'm not always in the harsh self-judgment cycle that requires constant forgiveness, meditating on interdependence and our shared humanity, recognizing that we all struggle, all make mistakes, and are all just doing the best we can given our conditioning and circumstances, journaling to process resentments in real time, getting thoughts and feelings out of my head and onto paper, which creates separation. From there, I can look at them with more objectivity, setting clear boundaries and speaking up for myself, so I don't bottle up hurts and grievances until they fester into explosive anger, making repair attempts and apologizing when I'm in the wrong, modeling accountability and taking ownership over my role in conflicts. Does anyone have other mindsets or habits they've cultivated to reinforce forgiveness? I'd love to hear any other practices that have been helpful. At the end of the day, forgiveness is a choice we all have to consciously make and recommit to over and over again, a courageous decision to let go, release the narratives and burdens that no longer serve us, and embrace our personal power to author our reality. It's not always easy, but it is absolutely worth it. So I invite you today to make that choice, to forgive yourself and others fully, to shed the emotional weights and baggage you've been carrying so you can move through life with more freedom, lightness, and joy. It won't be a straight path and there will be stumbles along the way, but the journey is invaluable. Imagine waking up every morning feeling unburdened, at peace, and fully present. No grudges or resentments weighing you down, no harsh inner critic bullying you, just a deep inner well of self-acceptance, empathy, and unconditional self-love. How would that shift your experience of life, of your relationships, work, goals, and dreams? For me, choosing forgiveness has been life-changing and life-affirming. Yes, it's hard work that requires constant recommitment, but it's allowed me to finally be free of the shackles of my past, to no longer be a hostage to narratives, mistakes, hurts, and grievances that have no place in dictating my present reality. I truly believe that forgiveness is one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves, one that unlocks our ability to embrace life's ups and downs with more grace, resilience, and wisdom, to show up more authentically in our relationships, work, and personal growth journeys without subconscious baggage holding us back. So let this be your call to action, to finally set down the burdens you've been carrying and choose the path of forgiveness. It won't be easy, but I promise the freedom, lightness, and self-love awaiting you on the other side is absolutely worth it. You deserve to feel unburdened, you deserve to heal, and most of all, you deserve to forgive yourself, others, and the universe at large for being wildly and beautifully imperfect. The time is now to reclaim your personal power and sovereignty over your inner peace, to no longer be a hostage to past hurts, traumas, or grievances. The path forward begins with a simple choice to forgive. So make that choice and take the first courageous step into radical self-love today. You've got this.